Home purchases are being canceled at a record rate. In fact, we're seeing the most home purchases being canceled for any July on record. What is going on with that? That is according to Redfin. Plus, we are going to talk about what is happening with mortgage rates because there has been quite a bit of movement there. In fact, we are seeing possibly some repercussions from mortgage rates in new construction as well as resale. So let's take a look and see what's going on. We got a little bit of good news, bad news, depending on what side you're on this time. So home purchases are getting canceled at a record rate. According to Redfin, 15% of home purchases fell through last month. So they're looking at July specifically, and they're saying it's the highest July rate on record. Now, in true Redfin fashion, they are only going back to 2017. So let's take this with a grain of salt, although it is clearly an indication that buyers are spooked to some extent to where they are canceling home purchases. They say 58,000 home purchase agreements were canceled in July. That's 15.3% of homes that went under contract last month. That's up from 14.5% a year earlier. So not that drastically different from last year, but it is, still 1 in 7 home purchases fell through. Now, what is going on with this? Why are people doing this? Well, a number of reasons, and truly most of the data that they're getting on this is just from opinions from agents that are working with various home buyers. A lot of it being kind of cold feet, obviously expenses, mortgage rates, all across the board, people kind of deciding that maybe they don't want to move forward with a purchase at this time. This was based on Redfin's MLS pending sales data, which is seasonal, and so they're comparing it obviously July to July for that reason. They think home purchases are falling through more than usual because of high prices, high mortgage rates, economic uncertainty, making buyers uneasy. Buyers also have more homes to choose from than in the past, which means they hold the negotiating power in many markets and often aren't in a rush. And this is definitely true. Buyers do have quite a bit more leverage than they have for years past. And when they have more options and they have contingencies like we do here in Arizona, it's a lot more likely for them to, say, I'm going to find something else if this is not going the way I want it to go. Right. So they are saying that specifically where they're seeing a lot of these cancellations is in Texas and Florida. Phoenix is not making this list. However, I did want to see what's going on in Phoenix. And this is kind of a hard stat to track because how far you go back and at what point a listing may have fallen through and gotten back on market, all of that is kind of hard to set those filters appropriately to find that. But I did my best here in MLS to see in the last 90 days how many homes actually showed that they had a fall through date, meaning they went out of contract, back on market. This is only for those that are currently active. So this is likely not a whole, the full number of anything that's fallen through in the last 90 days. But if I start to add more and more statuses here, I think there's repetitive data in there and we're not getting the correct number. So 946 is what it's showing as far as the number of homes that have fallen through at some point and are back on the market. And so if we compare that to the number of active listings that we have right now, about 23,000, that's about 4% of listings have fallen out and gone back on the market in the last 90 days here in Phoenix. So not as drastic as that 15%. Again, kind of taking some of that with a grain of salt because I don't think that is like perfect numbers, but just gives us kind of an indication that of course those types of things are still happening here in Phoenix as well. If we take a look at our active listings while we are on the topic, let's see what we have going on here. 23,555, clearly still seeing this downward movement with active listings. So good news if you're a seller, less competition on the market. For buyers, fewer properties out there, but you still have quite a bit to choose from, especially compared to years past. Now, this also leads me to the question of what is happening with our listing success rate, because we haven't looked at that in a few weeks when we saw that hit one of the lowest lows that we've seen in a very long time. And this is showing us the listing success rate. So how many listings actually close versus are canceling off the market or expiring. So right now we're sitting at about 65%. As you can see, this is definitely on the lower end of what we've seen over the last few years. Last time that we saw it this low was in December of 2022, which is when we saw a major shift in the market after mortgage rates increased. So doing a little bit better than we were then. I think we're at 61%, about 61% at that low, but we're not that much higher than we were in December of 2022. You can see the slightest rebound to 65% from 64% in July, but still seeing the listing success rate not very strong throughout the Phoenix area. Now, I can look at listing success rate by city. So if that is some information that you're curious of, whether you're thinking about selling or buying, check the description below. You can request that information for your city. Now let's talk about what's going on with mortgage rates, because we have been seeing a lot of movement in mortgage rates to the benefit of the buyer most recently. And this article here from Housing Wire have lower mortgage rates already boosted home builders. So for the last few weeks, I've touched on what's been going on with new construction, lots of incentives, lots to take advantage of as buyers because they've had more supply than they actually need, and they're trying to offload that. However, they're saying new home sales followed the existing home sales market by beating sales estimates and having positive revisions in today's report, which suggests that we're already seeing some benefits of lower mortgage rates. So they're saying that the new single-family home sales came in as a slight dip from June, but still better than estimates, which was around 630,000. Compared to last year, sales are down about 8%, but it still beat estimates. So they see that as a positive and could be from the effect of mortgage rates going down. When rates are at 7% or higher, builders are really struggling, specifically the smaller builders. However, large publicly traded builders are able to protect their margins a little bit better, so they've been hanging in there. But when we do see a decrease in mortgage rates, we start to see more buyer activity. Most of the time, resale is affected pretty quickly, but we also will see that in new construction. And it sounds like in this instance, new construction has been affected just as quickly as the resale market. They say that builders currently have about 121,000 completed units for sale, which is about 2.2 months of supply, which is historically the upper limit before they pull back on permits. However, in total, there are about 9.2 months of supply, most of it still under construction or not yet started. And this is why we're seeing housing starts at recession levels. So all in all, this could be maybe the beginning of sales stabilizing a little bit for new construction. We'll have to see. If rates continue to move downward towards 6%, then we might see a pretty good pickup in new construction. And so what can we expect from rates? Well, the latest from Powell, he's hinting at resuming Fed rate cuts, but he's kind of unsure on the timing. So the comments that Jerome Powell made on Friday really affected the markets and mortgage rates. That's where we saw a pretty big shift downwards. He was saying that he's focusing on slowing job growth and economic headwinds, made clear to his audience that a reduction is likely. He offered remarks regarding changes in trade and immigration policies that are affecting both supply and demand, as well as shifts in tax spending and regulatory policies. He noted that high borrowing costs, a softening labor market, and contained inflation risks could justify easing policy. So a lot of that commentary was taken very well by the markets, and we did see a dip in mortgage rates. Where we stand today, we're about 6.54-ish. These are really the lowest rates we've seen all year. And so this is pretty significant if you are a buyer who's been waiting for rates to drop. This is a pretty good drop. You can just see it right there, in this line. We were closer to 7. We were over 7 earlier this year, just as recently as May, and now around 6.5%. So Whether or not this continues is anyone's guess. Keep in mind that if the Fed does cut the federal funds rate in September, that doesn't mean that the mortgage rate is cut with it, but it's more so, just kind of the overall outlook of what's going on in the markets and what the next moves could be, which are going to affect what happens with mortgage rates. Now, we've been seeing this trend downward in rates for the last few weeks. Starting at the end of July, we saw a pretty big drop, and then we've kind of been hanging around there and going a little bit up and down since then. But we are starting to see the potential effect of that in the market here in Phoenix. So remember I said we have good news, bad news. Well, if you're a seller, this is good news. If you're a buyer, this is also good news for you. But if you are someone hoping for a market crash, this isn't the best news because there is some activity kind of brewing. So let's take a look at our listings under contract. And if any of this is helpful for you, consider subscribing or share this video with someone who would appreciate this information. I would love to grow this audience and continue to share this with you guys every single week. So listings under contract. Here we are at 7,056. And why this is significant is this is essentially tied to our buyer demand. We're seeing that buyers are going out, making offers, actually getting under contract on properties. And the purple line was last year, which was not the best year in terms of buyer demand. And this year we've been close to it, but for the most part, just a little bit lower every single week in terms of our listings under contract. And then you also have to remember that our inventory has been much higher this year than last year as well. So there's been a pretty big gap between what is staying on the market and what is actually going under contract. However, over the last few weeks, this red line has broken through the purple line. We are seeing more listings under contract in a time frame where we're typically seeing a flatter trend and then goes down towards the end of the year. We've seen this spike up. So most likely the drop in mortgage rates has spurred more buyer activity. So if you're a seller who's been waiting for that buyer to come along, your time might be coming soon. And so for any of you who follow me every single week, you're probably like, well, what does the CMI look like? So let's take a look at that. The Cromford Market Index is measuring at 78.1. This has been going up ever so slightly, mostly because our supply has been going down. We're definitely under 100 now. So that means that we are below normal for supply at 98.3. We're just very slightly 2%, less than 2% below normal. And our demand is also below normal, but much more well below at 76.8. So about 24% below normal. Either way, supply is moving closer to demand, which could put us into a balanced market versus a buyer's market if the trend continues. So we are seeing this overall number increase a little bit, mainly because that supply is going down and now we are seeing a little uptick in demand because of those mortgage rates. Now, if you are someone who is like 6.5% is still way too high, no thank you. Consider assumable mortgages. Those are still an option out there. Our team has been working with buyers who've been purchasing homes with assumable mortgages. If you want more information on that, check the description below. I have a list of homes with assumable mortgages, or you can set up a discovery call with our team to talk more about what that process looks like. Now, we have another week where we are seeing all of the major cities throughout the valley, almost all of them increasing on the CMI. Lots of green arrows here, a couple that aren't. Tempe and Maricopa and Goodyear didn't have any change month over month. But month over month change this week is 9.4%. Last week it was 8 something. I can't remember exactly. But every week we've seen an increase of this month over month change, and it's been a stronger move in a direction favorable for sellers. So we're now seeing that we have a number of cities in a seller's market, Scottsdale being at the bottom of that. Avondale, you can count that at 111, anything over 110, but just barely there. Chandler, Cave Creek, Fountain Hills, and Paradise Valley, all considered sellers markets at this point, although, pretty weak for the most part, except for Paradise Valley is quite a bit stronger. And then we've got a good number in balance, and then everything from Peoria down to Maricopa is considered a buyer's market. But we are seeing that strength continuing in the market and kind of, as that inventory goes down and as mortgage rates go down, it does seem like we're seeing a shift more in favor of sellers. Now, this is not an overnight change where we're going to see a much different market with, sellers having the upper hand and whatnot. Things are still, relatively balanced and in buyers markets in a lot of areas. However, we're just seeing a little bit more strength coming from the seller side. So it's going to have to continue for a bit to reflect that. But when we look at the contract ratio heat map, you can start to see a little bit of a change here. I just took this back to July. And as you go forward week by week, you start to see a little bit more green and less blue every single week. And when we look at green, that's balanced warm as compared to blue being the cold. So these zip codes are all strengthening and changing a little bit for the most part. We still have a hot zip code in Gilbert. I think this got on the map last week or the week before, 85233. A lot of everything that we're seeing here is green, indicating warm and balanced. And then we still have some colder zip codes as well. But you can, kind of see that color change, see the shift in this contract ratio. This really compares how many listings are actually on the market available for sale and how many are under contract. So it kind of shows that heat in the market. And this is a little bit quicker to react than the CMI. Now, don't forget, if you are a seller and you're looking for that listing success rate, check the description below for that. And for anyone trying to find homes with an assumable mortgage, you can check for more information below on that. Thanks for joining me this week. I will see you all next week on my next market update.